When I look at the 4th of July period in MLS right now, this kind of reminds me a little bit of the Premier League of what happened during the Christmas period, where there's a lot of games and that it's in a very short amount of time, and a lot of these teams will have to play a lot of games in a short amount of time, and that they have to have like 3 games in 7 day kind of scenario, and it's all about coaches kind of adjusting their starting 11, and that this is where the depth of a team and also the fitness level of a team will be tested at its peak, and that this is also where you are going to see some surprises in some of these resources, and that when you look at a strong team play against a relatively weak team, but if that strong team has been playing a lot of games in a short amount of period and decide to kind of rotate, that's when you might see the weaker team might pull off a bit of an upset, even though technically it's not really an upset because the stronger teams are just kind of rotating their squad and trying to play kind of their reserve just so that they can get the squad fresh enough for the next game. But with that being said, let's talk about this match week and the 4th of July midweek kind of action that we had. We have 10 games this midweek, which is the most that we're going to ever get in an MLS match week. And some of these games are actually very marquee matchup, and some of them that you definitely need to keep an eye on. And the first game that is exactly the case is NYCFC take on the Seattle Sounders. So NYCFC is actually one of the best teams in the league right now because they have a record of 6 wins, 8 draws, and 1 losses, while Seattle has a record of 8 wins, 5 draws, and 4 losses. And that NYCFC is actually the only team in the league now to only lost once this season. After LAFC, which was the other team that had a 1-loss season heading into last match week, lose to Colorado, NYCFC is now the only team. And not only that, they are actually now owns the longest unbeaten streak in MLS right now with 11 games unbeaten, and that they haven't lost a game since they lose to Toronto FC all the way back in March. And that they're going to be playing against a Sounders team that finally snapped out of that funk that they were in June, where they won 1-0 against the Vancouver Whitecaps. They scored a late winner in that game to beat the Whitecaps at home. And in terms of the last 5 games for NYCFC, they won 4-2 against Philly in the last game, won 5-2 against FC Cincinnati before the Gold Cup break, then drew 2-2 against Columbus, drew 1-1 against Chicago, and won 2-0 on the road against the Galaxy. For the Sounders, they won 1-0 against Vancouver, lost 2-1 against Montreal, lost 2-1 against FC Dallas, lost 3-2 against SKC, and drew 0-0 against Philly. And when you look at some of these losses that Seattle has lost, yeah, they are on the road. And Seattle is in a mix of a schedule where they are on the road for a lot lately, and that this, I believe, is the 5th game in 6 that they are on the road, and that the last game was really the first game that they were at home since all the way back in the beginning of May. So it's understandable why the Sounders are kind of struggling. I mean, the Sounders, you also got to think about that they were dealing with players that is currently on international duty or currently are injured. Now, the good news is I think they're going to get Nicolas Ladero back in the starting 11 because Ladero with Uruguay has pretty much his Uruguayan team has already got eliminated in Copa America, and that he should be back with the Seattle Sounders. However, Rui Diaz will not be back with this team just yet because Peru is still in the Copa America and is in the semifinal against Chile, I believe, tomorrow. So, yeah, Seattle is still a little bit shorthanded, and that this is definitely going to be a tough task against a team that is just red hot right now, and it's probably one of the team that is really kind of flying under the radar. Like, I think a lot of people, when they talk about good team, a lot of people don't mention the fact that NYCFC is actually a decent kind of team. And yes, although when you look at the record, it doesn't look very impressive. I mean, only 6 wins this season compared to other teams in the top of the Eastern Conference. They have definitely not a lot of wins, but they also have drawn a lot of games, although recently they are starting to turn those draw into wins, and that is definitely a good sign for NYCFC, because in the beginning of the season, the biggest problem for this team is that they can't win games. Like, they keep drawing games and keep getting points, which is good, but if you're not going to get wins and you just keep getting draw, it's not going to really help your cases in terms of moving up in the table. So now that they started to get some wins, and now that they're on a row and that they haven't lost a game since March, yeah, this is a team that I think a lot of people need to pay attention to, because this could definitely be a team that, you know, a lot of people thought after David Villa left last year that this team would take a big step back, but this year that doesn't seem like it's the case, and it seemed like the signings that they have with Matrita and Aber has really kind of pay off big time, and especially Aber, who has just been amazing for NYCFC this season. But moving on into the next match is Orlando City. So they play against the Union. Orlando City, who have a record of 6-3-8, playing against a Union side that has a record of 9-5-5 and are top of the Eastern Conference. And I think they're 2 points up on Montreal in terms of the top of the Eastern Conference right now. Orlando, of course, won 2-0 against Columbus away, while Philly lost 4-2 on the road against NYCFC. And in the last 5 games for Orlando City, they won 2-0 on the road against Columbus, lost 1-0 against DC on the road, then won 3-0 on the road against Montreal, but then lost 1-0 to the Galaxy, 1-0, and then won 5-1 against Orlando City. So you can start to see the trend, the fact that they are being very inconsistent, and that's been one of the stories with Orlando City. This team has been kind of inconsistent with the way that they've been playing, and that there's been times where, like the last game, where they didn't have a lot of chances, but they were very clinical in terms of finishing, and that's why they won that game. But then there's also games like DC or the Galaxy where they absolutely dominate their opponent and outshot them, yet they couldn't put the ball into the back of the net. And, you know, they're playing against a Union team, like I said, are top of the Eastern Conference. They, of course, did lose that last game, although in some way they kind of got robbed a little bit by the referee with the 2 penalties that gone against them that probably should have not been a penalty. But after that, they drew 1-1 against New England, won 3-2 against the Redbulls, won 3-2 against Minnesota, and drew 1-1 against Colorado. And, you know, Philly, although they're the team at the top of the Eastern Conference, they haven't looked that decent lately. I mean, when you look at even in the wins that they have, you know, against the Red Bulls, it was a come from behind effort, and that it was just El Zenio stealing the show. And then in that Philly game, but in that Minnesota game, they had to really fight for that game, and that if it wasn't for Minnesota not being clinical, they would have lost that one either. So it's not like Philly is just running the show, and that they are just showing why they are the best team in the Eastern Conference. And it also just further give me evidence of how bad the East is right now, where even the top team in the Eastern Conference doesn't look very comfortable. However, having said that, they're playing against Orlando City, and yeah, I mean, if this trend continues, I think this could be a loss for Orlando City because they're playing a stronger team. But it's just that every time when they have a good moment in game where they can fix the problems that they've been having, which is they just cannot finish and cannot put chances away, the very next game they do the same thing. So yeah, I'm gonna say the Union would win this one just because of the inconsistency that Orlando City is in, but you never know. We'll see how this one would go. But moving on into the next game, speaking of inconsistent, Chicago is another team that's been very inconsistent this season. Although lately it isn't really inconsistent, but it's been pretty bad for the Chicago Fire lately. Their record is now 4-7-7. They're facing against Atlanta, whose their record is 9-2-6. Chicago lost 3-1 against the Red Bulls away, and they basically had an Orlando City syndromes in the last game because they absolutely dominated the Red Bulls in terms of the shots and the chances that they create, but they could not finish, and that their defense was absolute garbage in the last game. While Atlanta United, of course, squeezed out a 2-1 win against Montreal at home. Chicago, of course, their last 5 games, talking about how things has gone from inconsistent to being very bleak for the Fire. They lost 3-1 against the Redbulls, drew 1-1 at home against RSL, lost 2-0 to Atlanta in the first meeting between both of these teams, drew 3-3 against DC United, and then drew 1-1 against NYCFC. And although, yes, they were playing some very good team lately and they weren't able to get some points, this team have shown in some of these games that they are definitely the better team, and that it's hard to know which Chicago team actually showed up. Is it a Chicago team that play against RSL, which they were absolutely god-awful and couldn't do anything? Or is it the Chicago team that play against the Redbulls, where they basically were on fire but couldn't finish their chances? Or was it also the Chicago team against DC, where things did go well for them and then things kind of fall apart until they rescue a draw? Or is it just a Chicago team that, when they won those games, they did it very comfortably? Which type of Chicago team will show up in this game against Atlanta? That is just a big question with this team, and it has to be very frustrating if you're a Chicago Fire team, seeing your team just kind of gone into 5 different versions, and you don't know exactly which version of a team that it's going to show up in match day. Now, Atlanta United, on the other hand, are kind of still rising, but they're slowly kind of rising after they kind of had a bit of a tear during the month of April and May. They won 2-1 against Montreal, but lost 3-2 against TFC, won 2-0 against Chicago, won 3-0 against Minnesota, before losing 2-1 to RSL in their last 5 games. And the good news for Atlanta in this game is that Joseph Martinez would be back in this team after Venezuela got eliminated in Copa America, which is good news for Atlanta, considering the fact that they really miss Martinez as their main goal scorer. And, for me, I think Atlanta should win this now that they are kind of coming back to full strength in this team. But again, you never know with Chicago, and the fact that what if Chicago is going to just play very good in this game and really take the task to Atlanta, and that Atlanta is just completely unprepared for that. So this is a game that could be a little bit unpredictable, but I think Atlanta should be able to win this with the form that they've been in, and they're starting to get more healthy as they have kind of been a little bit. They kind of are missing a couple of key starters in these past couple of games. But moving on into the next match is the Quakes. So the Quakes are playing against Minnesota on the road, and this is where I said in the beginning of the season where I hate this part of the schedule where we have so many games, and then there's this one stretch where we have a free games in 7-day period where for whatever reason the league decided that, why not put this team at home, and then in the middle of the week we're going to put them on the road against Minnesota before having to travel all the way back for a weekend game at home against San Jose. Or not against San Jose, but against RSL. What the actual fuck is that kind of a scheduling method? And that just, it makes no sense why that is the case. I know the league has been trying their best in terms of trying to make sure that each of these teams, when they go on a road trip, and that they go on an Eastern Conference road trip or even a Western Conference road trip, they're trying to limit the mileage. This is not an example of that. This is just the complete opposite of it. But as much as I want to go on complain about that, this is definitely another big game for the Quakes. And in fact, this stretch, every single game seems like a big game for the Quakes, because they are playing against teams that at the end of the season could be the teams that they might be trying to beat out in terms of getting those precious playoff spots. And at Minnesota, their record is 7-3-7, while us is 7-4-6. They're only 1 point behind us in the standings. They of course won 7-1 against FC Cincinnati in that historic win that they had in the last game. Well, of course, we won 3-0 against LA Galaxy to send even a further message that this team is as real as it gets. And in the last 5 games for Minnesota, as I mentioned, they had that historic 7-1 victory against FC Cincinnati. They did lose 1-0 to Colorado, did lose 3-2 to Philly, which is the only loss that they have suffered so far at Allianz Field. Lost 3-0 to Atlanta and won 1-0 against Houston. But don't let the last 5 game distract you from the fact that if you even include the Open Cup, they actually have looked very decent in their last couple of games. Now for the Quakes, they are on a 6-game unbeaten streak. They, of course, won 3-0 against the Galaxy in that Cali Clasico, won 2-0 against Houston. Actually, they didn't drew 1-1 to Dallas. They actually drew 2-2 to Dallas, but it was a draw between us and Dallas in that game. Then they drew 1-1 against DC and won 4-1 against Chicago. And, you know, this is definitely not an easy game for the Quakes. And although I know, as I said in the beginning of the year when the Quakes play against Minnesota, and that I was confident that we can beat Minnesota because we never lost to Minnesota. And then we lost to Minnesota in the beginning of the season. And that, you know, in this game against this Loons team that is definitely different than the one that we faced in the first 2 years, and that this is definitely the best Loons team that we have faced so far. It is going to be very interesting to see how the Quakes will do. And it will also be interesting to see whether or not if Almeida is thinking about rotation, and that, you know, now that I think we got some of our starters back, like Salinas and Houston back after suffering a bit of a knock, and that we're also going to get a couple of guys back from national team duty, like Cummins, for example. He decided to kind of switch it up, and that, you know, maybe put these kind of players in this starting 11, and then on that weekend game they can just put back the same starting 11 that won in that 3-0 and 2-0 win in those last 2 matches. So that's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what Almeida would do. I mean, maybe he'll just stick with the same starting 11 because, you know, this starting 11 has just been incredible, and it's just been on a clinic lately. Not only playing wonderful soccer, but they are just stingy as hell in terms of defense. Like, back-to-back clean sheet, having conceded a goal now for over 200 minutes. Yeah, that is like, you know, as the old saying goes, if it ain't broken, don't fix it, in terms of the situation that the Quakes are in. So very interesting to see what the starting 11 that Almeida is going to put, and very interesting to see whether or not if the Quakes can get all 3 points in this. I mean, I don't expect them to get all 3 points in this game. I mean, I know some Quakes fans said that we need to get 3 points against a team that we are potentially battling to trying to get those playoff spots. I think that knowing the fact that we're on the road, and as I said, I think whenever the Quakes are on the road, I never really expect them to have a must-win, unless if they have to win in order to go to the playoffs, or it's a team that, yeah, you definitely need to win, and that they are kind of like a bottom feeder kind of team we have to face on the road. That is the only time when I think it's a must-win for the Quakes. This one, I don't think it is. I think even if we get like a point out of this game, I will still be happy with the result, considering the fact that now we head to the weekend game against RSL, and that game should definitely be a very winnable game at home. But yeah, we shall see how that is going to go. But moving on into the next match, and for the second week in a row, LAFC is involved with a first versus last kind of matchup. So LAFC, who's top of the league with a record of 11-4-2, and that they did suffer that rare loss against Colorado and only dropped the second game of the season, are once again going to be playing a bottom feeder and a team that is in the basement of the Western Conference, known as Sporting KC, who has a record of 4-7-6. And it's very strange to say that Sporting KC is in the bottom of the Western Conference, considering the fact that this is still a Peter Vermees team, and a Peter Vermees team does not get this bad. But for whatever reason, with injuries or just the fact that the team just doesn't look like the same as previous year, has shown why this team has kind of struggled this season. And of course, they lost in the last game against RSL away. This team is really struggling this year on the road, which is something that I have not seen this team done in the past, where they struggle on the road. They usually are pretty decent on the road and also at home. Now, the good news is they're not on the road in this game. They're at home in this game against LAFC. And, you know, in the last 5 games for Sporting KC, they lost 2-0 to RSL, won 1-0 against Columbus, which was their first road win of the season. And even that, you have to put a big asterisk in terms of that road win, because it's Columbus. Everybody seems to be able to beat Columbus. Like, Columbus is basically like FC Cincinnati, kind of like the punching bag of of the league right now. Then they drew 2-2 against TFC in a game that they should have got 3 points if they didn't concede a late equalizer. Then they drew 1-1 against Houston. Then they lost 2-0 at home against the Galaxy. So their run of form lately has definitely not been very good. Well, for LAFC, they won 1-0, or they lost 1-0 to Colorado, won 3-2 against Portland, won 4-2 against Montreal, drew 1-1 against Dallas before winning 2-0 against Dallas. I know it says Montreal. That's actually wrong. That should say Dallas there. But yeah, I mean, for Sporting KC, as I mentioned in the review, I'm worried that this is going to be like they're suffering the same fate as what TFC suffered last year, where they go on a long CCL run, have injuries, and never recover in the second half of the season. And it doesn't get easier when they have to face LAFC, a team that that they're going to be angry about what happened last week against Colorado. That this is a team that is not going to suffer back-to-back loss, and that they're going to trying to just completely steamroll a team and trying to recover after suffering that shocking loss. So, yeah, for Sporting KC, they got to be very careful in this game. I think for Sporting KC fan, I think if they can get a draw out of this game, I'm sure they'll be happy with it, considering the fact that LAFC is just on a different planet than everybody else in the league right now, and are by far the favorites of winning MLS Cup. And that when you face a team that is that good and a team that is angry after what happened in the last game, yeah, good luck, Sporting KC. Hopefully you don't get absolutely rolled over in this game by LAFC. But having said that, moving on into the next game, the last game on this board before I switch the board for the last 4 games, is Houston. So the Dynamo is struggling, and the reason why they're struggling in these last couple of games is because they are on the road. And we know when the Dynamo are on the road, they cannot win. Now, the good news is they're back at home for the first time in what seems like a while. But the bad news is they're playing against one of the hottest teams in the Eastern Conference, that is the New York Redbulls, with an 8-3-6 record. Houston is winless in 5 games, while the Redbulls, of course, won 3-1 against Chicago at home. And in the last 5 games for the Dynamo, it's a very ugly mark. They lost 2-1 against New England, lost 2-0 against the Quakes, lost 4-0 to Portland on the road, drew 1-1 against SKC in their only home game in the last 5 games, and lost 1-0 on the road against Minnesota. So they have lost 4 out of the 5 games coming into this home game against the Red Bulls. Whereas for the Red Bulls, they won 3-1 against Chicago, lost 3-2 against Philly in a game that they just completely bottled a 2-0 lead, won 4-0 against RSL, won 2-0 against FC Cincinnati, and drew 2-2 against the Red Bulls. So this Red Bull team, they definitely know how to win on the road, and I just fear with Houston, this is something that I probably should have saw coming, where in the beginning of the season, I feel like the reason why Houston was just so good wasn't because of the fact that, Wilmer Cabrera was working miracles with this low budget team. It's more because of the fact that Elise was playing out of his mind, and that he was really contributing, and some other players were also playing out of their mind and contribute with this team. But it also has to do with the fact that they were playing some cupcake kind of games, and that they were beating teams that they should be able to beat, which there's no problem with that. But when you do have to face against tough team, and you are going to have a tough stretch where you have to go on the road, and they don't do well doing that stretch, then it makes you question the fact that, are you actually good at the same time? And right now with Houston, because of the skid that they're on, they have now dropped all the way to 7th in the Western Conference, when they were as high as 3rd place in the beginning of the season. So there's got to be a lot of panic right now in the Dynamo fan base, and the fact that this team, if this is going to continue where they just cannot win on the road, and that even recently they're starting to drop points at home, which is not a good sign, then this could really be a disaster. And against the Red Bulls, in a game where they desperately need a win to try to put a little bit pressure off in terms of their road form, yeah, it is not going to be very easy. And I really think Houston might be one of those teams that could fall out of the playoff picture, knowing the fact that there is so many teams right now in the Western Conference. Even at the bottom of the Western Conference are hungry to try to get up above that red line, and that some of these teams above the red line, they got to be a little bit careful in terms of how, if you have a bad stretch, you're going to find yourself in the bottom of the red line in just a couple of games, and Houston is really in danger of that. But that being said, I'm going to switch sports right now and look at the last 4 games from this midweek action on 4th of July. But yeah, next up, RSL. They, of course, are playing against Columbus. RSL have a record of 7-2-8, while Columbus have a record of 5-2-11. RSL, of course, won last game against SKC at home 2-0, while Columbus, yeah, it's not going well, isn't it, for the crew? They're winless in 6 games, while for RSL in their last 5 games, they won 2-0 against not Columbus. Oh, I made a mistake again. You see what happened when I'm trying to do this hurry, and that, since I'm doing this a little bit late at night, I keep making some mistake in some of these on some of these stats. So that should be SKC instead of Columbus. Just ignore that is the case. But they did drew 1-1 against Chicago, lost 4-0 against the Redbulls on the road, lost 2-1 against Montreal on the road, but win 2-1 against Atlanta at home. And judging by the pattern, you will know that they are actually better at home than they are on the road. Well, for Columbus, yeah, it's an ugly stretch that they have been on. They lost 2-0 to Orlando City, lost 1-0 to SKC, drew 2-2 against NYCFC, lost 3-2 against Columbus, and lost 1-0 to Minnesota. So they have lost 4 out of the 5 games. And on paper, RSL should win this because they're at home. And it seemed like this season at home, just like what happened last season, they tends to do very, very well and tends to get the points. But the question is, I'm just, one thing I'm worried about RSL is the fact that, not really about this game, but what I'm kind of start thinking about the fact that, can they do something like last season where they are able to win most of their home games, and then they're able to just get those road points at the right time, and they sneak into the playoffs, because that's what they did last season. And remember, last season the Western Conference is not as strong as this season Western Conference. Like, this season Western Conference is at least 3 times better than the Western Conference of last season. So while they did get it away with that last season, can they do it this time? Although, that's just a bit of a long-term kind of thought for RSL fans, but in this one they should be able to win this, and if they don't win this, then yeah, that is not very, very good. If you do not win against Columbus, a team that everybody has been able to beat them lately, like besides FC Cincinnati, whenever you face Columbus, it's pretty much close to an automatic 3 points, especially when you're playing them at home. But moving on into the next match, and now heading into the 4th of July match, as these next 3 matches going to be on 4th of July. And the first one is Colorado. They play against New England in this game, and if I would have told you back in the beginning of May that when both of these teams were at the bottom of their respective conference and were in a record bad state, with Colorado starting the season 11 games without a win, and New England obviously just had Brad Friedel got fired. If I would have told you that both of these teams, 2 months later, when both of these teams meet each other, that this would be a matchup between 2 teams that has been having an unbeaten run longer than 6 games, you would have said I'm crazy. Like, you would have think I'm just living in another world. But here we are in July. Colorado, one of the hottest teams in the league, winning 5 of the 7 games and unbeaten in 7 games, including beating LAFC in that last matchup where they won 1-0. And that wasn't an LAFC team that was playing the reserve. That LAFC team were having guys like Vela and Rossi in that starting 11, and that it was still a very strong LAFC team that they beat. While New England, on the other hand, ever since Brad Friedel has been fired, they have gone unbeaten in 6 games. And you look at these last 5 games for both of these teams. Colorado, 1-0 win against LAFC, drew 2-2 against Vancouver, won 1-0 against Minnesota, drew 1-1 against Colorado, and won 3-2 against Columbus. While for New England, they won 2-1 against Houston, 1-1 against Philly, won 2-1 against the Galaxy, drew 1-1 against DC, and drew 0-0 against New England. So both of these teams has just been pretty consistent in terms of getting wins and getting points, and that, this is definitely a showdown that I don't think a lot of people would have thought that it would be the case a couple of months ago. Like, both of these teams, I feel like, are kind of on the same path and having the same kind of season where when you have both of these teams that is struggling so much early in the season, they fired their head coach, got a new one. Well, for Colorado, they still have Connor Casey, but you got to give Connor Casey a hell of a credit, and that you wonder maybe they should give him a shot of being the head coach of Colorado, considering what he has done with this Rapids team and making this team look like the best team in the league right now with this unbeaten streak. Now they're at this point where both of these teams are threatening to go above the red line, and that this could be one of those games where, something's going to have to give in terms of the unbeaten streak, or if they drew in this game, then the unbeaten streak continue. But I think a lot of people, as I mentioned, would just be insane to think that 2 months ago this would be a matchup between two teams that have an unbeaten streak longer than 6 games, and that have one of the longest unbeaten streak right now in the league. It's just absolutely insane. But here we are. That's why MLS is a crazy league, and that's why MLS, every team, even though you have a bad season, as long as you get on a good run, then you are going to be back on track. But moving on into the next match is Dallas. They play against DC United in this game, and I kind of want to say this is a bit of a desperation game, although Dallas, they're currently in 4th place, although they have played some of the most games in MLS right now and in the Western Conference, and they're playing against a DC team that, they are struggling big time right now. And the funny thing about this is that, both of these teams, aren't really like, I don't want to, just like the Colorado versus New England game, both of these teams have been kind of unbeaten lately. FC Dallas, of course, they lost 1-0 against, actually, I take back what I said about them being unbeaten. They actually, FC Dallas actually got their unbeaten run ended in the last game against Portland, where they lost 1-0, and that should have been a red mark instead of a green mark to say that they won. And then DC, of course, drew 1-1 against TFC. And when you look at the last 5 games for Portland, or for Dallas, they lost 1-0 to Portland, drew 2-2 against Dallas, won 3-0 against TFC, drew 2-2 against the Quakes, and won 2-1 against Seattle. And that for DC, they drew 1-1 against TFC, won 1-0 against Orlando City, drew 1-1 against San Jose, drew 3-3 against Chicago, and drew 1-1 against DC. And it's pretty clear that DC is having problem in terms of scoring, because 4 out of their last 5 games, and really 5 out of their last 6 games, they have only scored 1 goal. And as I mentioned many times before, with that kind of attack, there should not be a time where DC is struggling in terms of scoring goal. Now, the thing about DC is they have to go on the road to play against Dallas, who has been very good at home so far, and that, they kind of are going to be a little bit frustrated of what happened last week, where, in that game between them and Vancouver, they threw away a 2-0 lead and threw away 3 points at home. And then against Portland, if it wasn't for them not being clinical, they could have at least got a point out of that game. So they'll definitely feel like they want something to prove, and that they need to get points in this game. Well, for DC, I just think that you can't expect this team to just score 1 goal every single game and expect they still be in the top 3 of the Eastern Conference. Like right now, the defense is what is saving DC United right now. If it wasn't for a very stellar defense that DC United is having right now, this team would really be struggling right now. And it just gets to the point where if they do not pick up, and that if they don't score like goals And that this is kind of like the same thing I said about Atlanta earlier in the season when they also struggle and only score like one goal every single game. If they don't pick that up, and if they do give up that first goal, then they are in serious trouble, because you know for a fact that they're not going to get more than 2 goals because of the pattern that has happened, and that most likely they're going to either drop points or they're going to lose that game. So for DC, they are due for a breakout game, and that they are definitely due for a game where they score more than 1 goal, simply. But I just think this might not be the one, because Dallas is a team that is good in terms of defending, and also Dallas is a team that is very good at home this season. And last but not least is the Galaxy. They take on TFC in this game. So the Galaxy is 10-1-7, while TFC is 6-5-7. The Galaxy, of course, lost 3-0 away to the Quakes, and TFC drew 1-1 against DC away. And in some way, I think this game is kind of a desperation kind of game for both of these teams, and both of these teams really wants to get a win. And I know what you're thinking. How in the world is the Galaxy desperate to try to get a win when they are in second in the Western Conference? Well, when you look at their last 5 games, they lost 3-0 to the Quakes. They lost 2-1 to the Refs. They did win 2-0 against SKC, which I think was really the only win that I would say that they looked pretty good. Then they won 1-0 against Orlando City, but Orlando City had a lot of chances in that game, and that it was just one of the many games where Orlando City had the chances, but they just couldn't put it away. And then they lost 1-0 to Colorado. So the run of forms in the last 5 games have definitely not been very good for the Galaxy. And it isn't just the run of form. There has started to be some toxic behind the locker room involving Zlatan, of how, we heard throughout the season that Zlatan has been kind of an egoistic prick, being just kind of a villain in MLS, kind of targeting players and just kind of try to wind up opposition. Well, he is not only not just wind up opposition, but now he's kind of winds up his own teammate. Like, some of his teammates are really not happy with the way that he is kind of acting, and the way that he's kind of like just the only player on that team, and that all it matters in that team is just him, which is not a big surprise because that's what Zlatan is. But the thing about that kind of thing, and that the one thing that I did had a big concern when that report came out is that, yeah, I had a feeling this was eventually going to come, where when the Galaxy are not winning and when Zlatan is not happy, which he clearly is not happy with the Galaxy right now, then it's going to definitely fall apart in the locker room, that he is really started to kind of call his teammate out and saying that, you should have given me the ball more often, and that you of course need to give me the ball so I can set up the ball in a perfect spot so that I can of course score. And that is exactly not what happened. Well, for TFC, they drew 1-1 against DC, won 3-2 against Atlanta, lost 3-0 against TFC, drew 2-2 against SKC, and lost 3-0 against RSL. Now, barring the game against Atlanta, where that was the crazy game where Atlanta had a penalty late in. Well, first it was TFC had a late penalty that Pozuelo puts it in, and then Atlanta had a late penalty that was called after the final whistle was blown, but they had to say it was a penalty once they look at VAR, even after the final whistle. But Pity Martinez, of course, missed that. Barring that crazy madness game, TFC have not looked good, and there is no doubt that TFC really need to win this game. Now, I have also just heard that they have made another signings in the summer transfer window. I forgot who exactly it is, but I'll make sure I'll talk about it in the news of the week tomorrow. But yeah, TFC, they are definitely desperate to try to get a win, because they're just above the red line. This is a team that I have no doubt that if they keep playing like this, they are not going to make the playoffs. Like, there is some teams, I know the Eastern Conference is wide open this season, but if you're just going to keep playing like this and just only winning 1 game out of like 9, like what TFC is right now, yeah, that is definitely not going to do it in terms of trying to make the playoffs. And for the Galaxy, as I said, I just feel like they just don't look like a team that is in second. Like, it is crazy the fact that the Galaxy is in second when I can clearly point out that there is a lot of problem with this team. Like, it all starts with either the attacks sometimes just sputter, or the fact that they're being too one-dimensional and just give it to Zlatan, or sometimes it's just the defense not being very good, and then there are also games where they play at home and they face against teams that they should win, and they drop points against them. Despite all of that problems that the Galaxy had, I have no idea how they are in second place. And I just have a feeling eventually this is going to catch up to the Galaxy. And if they keep doing like this, and especially how so many teams behind them is started to catch up to them and started to really trying to take that spot, I won't be surprised if the Galaxy would fall down the table if, you know, they start a bit of a losing streak. Like right now, they're already lost 2 games in a row, and if they lose TFC and go 3 games in a row, then yeah, this is gonna be very, very interesting. But that being said, that is pretty much it for the preview of this week. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all 10 of these games. I of course would do the review not on the 4th of July. I will still do the preview for the weekend games on the 4th of July, but I'll plan to do the review on Friday instead, because I want to first do like I know on Thursday we have games and the last game is like 9:30, and I don't feel like doing I really don't feel like doing a review on 4th of July, and when there's like fireworks shooting off in the background, you know, it's not a really good time to actually do a preview or do a review of the video. Like right now I'm doing this at night, and I am very fortunate that there's not really like a lot of fireworks going off in the background. And if you actually heard it, I do apologize for that, because we're getting to it that time of the season where people are just shooting fireworks for fun, just trying to test it out, and then before they basically do the main event on the 4th of July. And yes, the city that I'm living in right now is one of those rare cities that allow fireworks on 4th of July. So yeah, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these games, and yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.